You're listening to Zodiac Speaking, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Scene of the Crime, and 3 Men and a Mystery. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
This is the Zodiac Speaking. On a pleasant sunny day on June 8, 1967, Enedine Molina, who was 35 years old, and her boyfriend, Fermin Rodriguez, who was 36, reported to have been 10-year lovers, had taken a car journey to the remote Sunol Regional Park in Alameda County, and they were reported to have parked alongside Vallecito's Road on the outskirts of the park. Nearing 10 p.m., somebody approached their vehicle and shot Fermin Rodriguez in the front chest and shoulder with a .22 caliber weapon as he sat in the passenger seat of Enedine's station wagon. It's speculated that the killer then abducted Enedine Molina and drove her away in his vehicle in a southerly direction about 6 miles to Calaveras Road by Geary Road, near the entrance to Sunol Park, where it appears she either fled or was forced to run away. Her bid for freedom was short, though, and she was felled by at least one bullet to her back. According to detectives, Regional Park naturalist Richard Angel called the Santa Rita Sheriff's Substation on the night of Thursday, June 8, 1967, and reported hearing 2 shots in the park area at just after 10 p.m. Enedine's body was discovered at around 11 p.m. just outside the remote Sunol Regional Park. Her body was found by Deputy George Robinson, the first man to arrive at the park. Mrs. Molina had been shot in the back and possibly her wrist. It appeared that she had been running away when she was shot. On his way back to the substation at around 2:30 a.m., Deputy George Robinson spotted a station wagon parked along Vallecito's Road, about 6 miles from the park. He stopped to check it out, and that's when he found Fermin Rodriguez's body. Rodriguez had been shot in the left chest area and his shoulder bone. The bullets entered his body from the front. The murder weapon was believed to be a .22 caliber revolver, but no gun was found. Many suspicious occurrences have been detailed in the run-up to the double murder. Both victims reported being followed several times by an unidentified driver in the weeks leading up to the murders. Each also received mysterious phone calls over a period of many months, according to reports from the Alameda County Sheriff's Department. Enedine Molina's daughter told detectives that the family had been receiving disturbing phone calls at her mother's residence since July 1966. She said that whoever called didn't speak, and that all that could be heard over the phone was heavy breathing. The daughter said that the calls usually were made between 10 and 11 a.m., or between 7 and 8 p.m., and that her mother was usually not home when the calls came in. Detectives also reported that the daughter told them she had overheard her mother say that a car followed her when she was out one day. Substantially, the same story was given to detectives by Lydia Rodriguez. She was the widow of Fermin Rodriguez, who was still married to her at the time. Mrs. Rodriguez said that her husband had also complained about a car following him. On another occasion, she said her husband had told her that he had seen the strange car parked in front of his house, but he couldn't describe the driver. The question arises, were the murders committed by someone known to the victims who stalked them in advance, or a complete stranger totally unconnected to the mysterious phone calls and the driver? Enedine Molina's ex-husband, Joe Martinez, who was 35 years old, who lived in Mountain View in Santa Clara County, was questioned, but released by police.
Regional Park naturalist Richard Angel was employed at the Sunol Valley Regional Park from 1965 until 1983 and reported hearing 2 shots at about 10:05 p.m. If Enedine Molina and Fermin Rodriguez both sustained 2 gunshot wounds and only 4 shots were fired that night in total, it is probably safe to say that Richard Angel likely heard the 2 shots that struck Enedine Molina based upon the location she was discovered, close to the entrance of Sunol Park. If she was killed after Rodriguez, then he must have been killed 10 to 15 minutes earlier at about 9:50 or 9:55 p.m., assuming this was a continuous attack, one after the other. Vallecillos Road, where Rodriguez was found at 2:30 a.m. on June the 9th, is extremely rural, with only a few farms and developments on its western side, so this would have been an extremely secluded spot for a couple seeking privacy, with very little road or foot traffic. This brings forward the question as to whether they were just extremely unlucky to have encountered a random killer cruising the area, or they were trailed to this location by somebody they knew, who were possibly enraged by their relationship. But if the latter was the case, why didn't the killer just murder them both alongside Vallecillos Road and drive away? And if only one person was involved in the attack, they would have to control the situation during the journey west on Vallecillos Road and south on Calaveras Road to Sunol Park. If the killer's original intention was sexual in nature, then it could be argued that after firing 2 shots at Rodriguez, he may have thought it wise to vacate the location because of possible ear witnesses. Turning north from Vallecillos Road leads to Pleasanton and a much more heavily populated area, but turning south towards Sunol Park and Geary Road, you would arrive at an area that is practically uninhabited, suggesting the murderer may have had knowledge of his whereabouts, as opposed to a complete stranger to Alameda County and the Sunol Park region. But if a sexual attack was his intention, why did a 35-year-old woman running away from him in a secluded area present such a problem that required him shooting her in the back rather than chasing her down? Did she scream and the killer just panicked? The investigators reported no evidence of a sexual attack or robbery, so the murders appeared motiveless. And again, if it was revenge involving a love interest, why didn't the killer just commit both murders on Vallecillos Road and disappear into the night? Was the intention to make Enedine Molina suffer a more brutal outcome in Sunol Park, thereby shifting the focus back to somebody closer to her? The newspapers reported, quote, "A Mountain View man, Joe Martinez, of 1819 Birch Street, ex-husband of Enedine Molina, turned himself in at the Sunnyvale police station after hearing he was wanted for questioning. He was later released by Sunnyvale police and Alameda County sheriff's officers. Captain Tom Houchins, in charge of the investigation, said, 'As of now, we have no suspects.' Detectives ordered weekend roadblocks to canvass the individuals. The weekend roadblocks were in the areas of Geary Road and Calaveras Road. Captain Tom Houchins said officers questioned persons between 10 p.m. and midnight, believed to be the time span when the two were killed. Houchins said there is a possibility that another car was involved."
Being primarily a Zodiac researcher, I thought it was worthwhile to take a look at this crime in respect to known Zodiac activity, such as the Lake Herman Road murders in 1968. Molina and Rodriguez were parked alongside a road late at night when they were approached by somebody with a .22 caliber weapon. The assailant then murdered the greater threat first, before setting his sights on the female, just like at Lake Herman Road. We have a divergence in the 1967 case, though, because the female was driven 6 miles away. But she was also shot in the back while fleeing from the killer, just like the murder of Betty Lou Jensen. This piqued my interest enough to contact the Alameda County Sheriff's Office for additional information in April 2010. I received a reply from Deputy Sergeant Scott Dudek, who agreed it was an interesting proposition to examine this in a little more detail. Unfortunately, much of the material in the Molina-Rodriguez case had been lost, damaged, or destroyed in the intervening years. But Sergeant Dudek was able to retrieve the ballistics report, and crucially, the actual bullets retrieved from the crime scenes. This opened up the possibility of comparing the .22 caliber bullets to the ones retrieved from the Lake Herman Road turnout, and that might hopefully forge a link between the two crimes separated by 50 miles. Sergeant Dudek then contacted the Solano County Sheriff's Department, who agreed to furnish him with the bullets and casings retrieved from the turnout in Benicia. Disappointingly, the ballistics evidence provided by the Solano County Sheriff's Department was not of sufficient detail to definitively tie the two cases together, and the determination was deemed inconclusive. In short, the bullets provided by Solano County were just too badly damaged to do anything with as far as ballistics. But it wasn't just the Lake Herman Road murders that were relevant to the Molina and Rodriguez case, because we know that the Zodiac was fond of making phone calls to the police and possible victims, as we explored in the case of Richmond schoolteacher Daniel Williams in October and November 1969, who was also targeted in a series of malicious phone calls at his home, before somebody attempted to murder him with a deadly dose of arsenic. There were also suspicious phone calls to the family of Darlene Ferrin shortly after the murder, where the caller remained silent just like the caller to the home residence of Enedine Molina. We have to realize that there is an element of clutching at straws in attempting to link the Molina and Rodriguez case to the Zodiac, but many Zodiac investigators and internet sleuths are open to the idea that the murder of 5 in Benicia, Vallejo, and Napa County in San Francisco didn't begin his murderous exploits on December 20th, 1968. Perhaps something preceded this. If there is such a case, then an attack in the Bay Area or just beyond might be a good place to start.
The body of Enedine Molina was discovered close to the intersection of Calaveras and Geary Roads, about 600 metres past the Sunol Valley Water Treatment Plant, just under 3 miles south of the San Antonio Reservoir. But was this really the culmination of the attack on Molina and Rodriguez, and not the beginning? The area of Sunol Park would appear a much more scenic location for a couple to have sought a little privacy. However, an attack beginning here would require the killer approaching on foot before forcing the couple to exit the station wagon. An attempted escape by Enedine Molina could have resulted in the killer shooting her in the back. The killer would then have had to force Fermin Rodriguez to drive him 6 miles northwards to Vallecito Road, where he ultimately shot the male before venturing off into the night. The cities of Pleasanton and Livermore were a few miles in the distance. The only logical reasoning for such a sequence of events would be to get the killer closer to home without getting him too close to his own doorstep. Although realistically, this appears the least likely of the two options presented. The families of both victims reported a car was following them in the months before their murders, with the daughter of Enedine Molina and wife of Fermin Rodriguez additionally reporting sinister phone calls to each of the victims' residences, involving heavy breathing. So, assuming that these events actually took place, is it the logical conclusion to believe that their eventual murders were perpetrated by this unknown individual harassing and stalking them? A vendetta against both simultaneously may suggest a third party with an emotional or love interest to one of the victims. Assuming the perpetrator was a man, then this may explain why Enedine Molina appeared the focus of the attack on June the 8th. Joe Martinez, recently separated from his wife, Enedine, may have had reason to be bitter about a love affair lasting 10 years between Enedine and Rodriguez, assuming he was aware, along with his marriage breakup. However, he willingly handed himself in to the Sunnyvale police station and was subsequently released without charge. If he was thoroughly intent on revenge, one might have thought he would have trailed the couple and murdered them both while they were parked alongside Vallecito Road and left immediately, rather than perform an abduction on his wife. Unless, of course, he wanted to make his ex-wife suffer a different fate. He seems the obvious suspect, but sometimes the obvious suspect is not the perpetrator. None of the victims had previously identified Joe Martinez as the person in the suspicious vehicle trailing them, or the person parked outside the Rodriguez household.
Vallecito Road is part of State Route 84, which runs over the Dumbarton Pass to East Palo Alto, about 8 miles south of the 1975 murder of Anthony Vincent Bruno Jr., who was 17 years old. He was killed on November 2nd, 1975, just after midnight. According to Police Captain George Stevenson, Bruno and his 16-year-old girlfriend had been parked on Monte Cresta Drive, just above Barclay Way, in an isolated area of Western Hills, when a man, out of nowhere, opened the driver's side door and, without saying anything, fired his 12-gauge shotgun. The girl, who was not identified by police, pushed Bruno's body aside and drove the car to her home, and then called police. She described the assailant as white, 5'5", 140 pounds, and wearing an army green parka with a hood, according to police. It was possible that a late model brown pickup truck, possibly a Dodge or Chevy, had been seen in the area at about the time of the shooting. Again, somebody approaching a lone couple in their vehicle and targeting the male first. Had the stock of the assailant's shotgun not broken during the shooting, and the young woman not reacted immediately by gaining control of the Datsun, the outcome could have been totally different. If the killer had a vehicle close by, then the young female victim may have been abducted from the scene, and who knows what might have become of her. On December 11, 1975, the San Mateo Times added a little more detail, saying, "The youth, Anthony Vincent Bruno of 213 Bayview Drive, San Carlos, died instantly. His body sprawled on the seat of the parked car beside his terrified 16-year-old girlfriend. The killer then turned, dropped the sawed-off stock of his weapon on the ground, perhaps by accident, and fled. It was disclosed Wednesday that about an hour and a half before the brutal slaying, a man was seen struggling to drag a box about 2 feet long and 18 inches wide up a steep rise about 100 feet from the slaying site. A rod, or perhaps a rope, protruded from the box, according to police, and the dragging was being done by a man in mechanic's overalls with longish dark brown hair. Police are searching for the driver of a maroon pickup truck, equipped with black wall tires and white wheels. A vehicle, which they have information to believe may have approached the parked couple 15 minutes before the slaying, stopped a distance away, made a U-turn, and then drove off. The girl gave a follow-up description of the assailant. She saw a face, but she couldn't identify him. She couldn't see whether he was black or white or anything other than he was 5'5", 140 pounds, and wearing a green army-type parka. The description would be a seriously malnourished and diminutive Zodiac killer. But putting that aside for the moment, we have an attack on a couple parked up in a lover's lane area just after midnight, approached by a man brandishing a weapon, who may have drove his vehicle close to the couple before leaving and returning minutes later to commit murder. It sounds very familiar. It sounds like the Blue Rock Springs attack. Belmont Police Chief William Singer told the paper, "We've never had a case like this before. This is the bloodiest, most brutal killing I've ever seen." He even added, "It could be another Zodiac." Of course, it may not be the Zodiac, but it could be somebody imitating the Zodiac, or quite possibly the same individual who murdered Enedine Molina and Fermin Rodriguez 8 years earlier.
There is a slim chance this was the Zodiac killer, but a copycat is certainly a reasonable assertion, bearing in mind that the following day it appears a Zodiac letter and possibly a cassette tape were discovered in a phone booth close to the area where Anthony Vincent Bruno was murdered. Mike Morford stated on his forum that a San Mateo news article dated November the 14th, 1975, gave us some additional information. Quote, "The reporter, a man named Bob Foster, mentions that on the night of November the 3rd, 1975, the 11 p.m. TV news on channel KGO ran a story about a Zodiac letter being found in a phone booth. This is pretty interesting to me for a couple of reasons regarding the timing. First of all, because the night before, on November the 2nd, 1975, a young man and his girlfriend were attacked on a lover's lane by a gun-wielding man. The male victim, Vincent Bruno, was killed, but his girlfriend survived. If I recall correctly, there may have been a letter and cassette tape found the same night in a phone booth, not far from the attack site, from someone claiming to be Zodiac. KGO TV opened their 11 o'clock news with a story about the Emilio Zapata group, which threatens Safeway stores with bombing. This was followed by another unimportant news story about a letter found in a phone booth, alleged to be from the Zodiac killer. Whether this letter is from the man who killed Anthony Vincent Bruno is dependent on the time delay between the murder and the discovery of the letter. If the letter had been discovered after the news of the attack had been released by the media, it could easily have been somebody unrelated to the murder. But equally, the letter could have been placed in the phone booth by the Zodiac killer after hearing or reading about the murder, It just depends on the sequence and timing of the unfolding events. Detective Mike Troy described Anthony Vincent Bruno as a clean-cut kid with no known connection to criminal elements. He spoke to the kids at the local Belmont High School where Anthony Vincent Bruno was a student and discovered that many of them were unaware of the Lovers Lane area on Monte Cresta Drive. The attack appeared motiveless to the detective, so the question arises, was the killer aware that this area was frequented by courting couples and young teenagers and local to the Belmont area? The psychologically affected girlfriend of Bruno would later go on to say that she could not see the face of the killer, but couldn't tell whether he was black or white. Therefore, the description she gave must be regarded as extremely questionable and understandable, having had just a fleeting moment to register the events of that terrible night. The killer had opened the driver's side door and fired his Stevens model 124 12-gauge bolt-action shotgun into the mouth of Anthony Vincent Bruno from near point-blank range. The young man had little chance of survival. The murders of Enedine Molina, Fermin Rodriguez and Anthony Vincent Bruno remain unsolved to this day.
This is the Zodiac speaking.
All right, these are the two scenarios. We probably both agree on the most likely order of events, but what are your thoughts on either Rodriguez first being killed and then Molina being driven 6 miles to Sunol Park, where she is killed by an assailant driving a vehicle? In other words, he killed Rodriguez and then he took her in his vehicle to Sunol Park, where she was killed. Or they were parked up at Sunol Park when somebody on foot approached them, removing them from the vehicle and killing Molina before getting Rodriguez to drive him back up to Vallecito Road before killing him.
Yeah, that's an interesting, consideration, either scenario. I think personally, it would seem, and again, this is just my take on it, that Fermin Rodriguez may have been dispatched first and him just out of the way, and then the person that did this could take Molina with him, and whatever his intention were, I assume it's a him, I'm saying him, would take her with him to do whatever. Maybe he was going to sexually assault her, maybe he wanted to terrorize her, who knows. But in my estimation, it went down to where the male victim was killed first, and then she was driven someplace, and whatever happened there. But you bring up good points, and it's important to consider, because if they were killed at if Rodriguez was killed at one spot, let's say, and Molina was taken away to another spot. So I wonder if a person at the scene would pull up, and I assume this is the way it would go, would pull up, kill Rodriguez. Rodriguez's body was found in his car. However, Molina was taken away from the scene and found someplace else without a car. So I think it's likely that the killer arrived in a vehicle, killed Fermin Rodriguez, left the car there, and took Molina with him to that other spot where ultimately he killed her. I think that's the most likely scenario in this situation.
Do you think, therefore, that would suggest there was a sexual motive involved in this crime rather than revenge?
Well, it possibly could be. What's interesting is the time of the murders. It doesn't seem like the killer spent much time with her, from what we can gather. So it doesn't seem like he would have enough time to really do anything. Or maybe, who knows, maybe he tried and she put up a fight. We just don't know. But I sort of envision it going down, at least the initial attack, as sort of like Faraday and Jensen did, where the person comes upon him. Maybe it's sort of like the Blue Rock Springs and they think it's a cop or something. So maybe Fermin Rodriguez is getting ready to get his driver's license out and he's killed. And then, she runs off and she's dispatched, taken away and to this other spot. And then she flees at that other spot. Maybe she breaks away, she escapes, or he even tells her to run. And then he shoots her in the back, sort of as we saw with Betty Lou Jensen. So I tend to think that was the more likely scenario. And the sexual component, we just don't know. Maybe he was going to do something and things didn't work out the way he planned. It just doesn't seem like there was enough time with her alone to really do anything. So maybe he was going to, but it just didn't work out.
How do you envisage things happening after he abducts her? Does he get her to drive, which is risky because she could drive the vehicle off the road, and that puts him in a complete mess? Or does he drive and restrain her, which would mean he'd have to bring some sort of restraints as well?
Well, that's a very good point. And it could be simply he's got a gun in his one hand and he's aiming at her, and she knows that he means business because she just witnessed him kill her boyfriend. So I think that he'd be able to just drive with one hand holding a gun on her with the other one saying, if you move, I'm going to kill you. And then she would cooperate because she knows that he's capable of it. Another possibility could be possibly there were two people, maybe one to drive and one to hold her at gunpoint. We don't know. And we don't know enough about the crime scene. There weren't enough details as far as were there multiple sets of footprints, that kind of stuff. I don't think that minutia of the case is really known as to what they found, what they didn't find at the crime scene as far as footprints and things like that.
I suppose this is where we have to bring in what happened in the months before. Do you find it probable that the person responsible for trailing the couple in the months prior to their murders, along with the phone calls of heavy breathing, is likely their killer, and somebody who had a personal connection to both victims because both of them were targeted in the months prior, weren't they?
Yeah, there's definitely evidence that both of them were being stalked or harassed, different calls, cars being spotted. There's some real interesting parallels to the Zodiac case here because the car was said to be a white car. And we know about the infamous white car seen supposedly on Lake Herman Road and in front of Darlene Farron's house. But again, white cars are common, but it seems like someone in a white car was following this couple. But that aside, the calls, the other things that were reported, it just seems too much of a coincidence. If you're getting this series of calls and cars following you and spying on your house, and then later on you are killed, it's going to be hard to ignore those things and think they're not connected. I mean, technically they could be, but, and you'll have to refresh my memory, but was there a case of them calling after the murder too? Were they still receiving calls? I almost remember that being an issue.
From what I read in the newspapers, no.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason I thought the calls may have continued after the murder, but
that doesn't mean there wasn't. I just didn't read it.
Yeah, so, and that's something I'd have to go back and check on, but it definitely seems as if there was some kind of, this wasn't a random, and again, I'm just guessing, wasn't a random thing. I would think it was connected. That's just me, but we just don't know. Now, again, they were sort of involved in this, one of them was married, and anytime you're in a situation like that where you're married but you're seeing someone else, it's going to make for a messy situation. And police quickly looked at that and said this might be a possibility. And they looked at that and ruled that out because I think the significant others had an alibi, airtight alibis. So it's tough to say if it was just something random or if it was connected to this earlier activity.
Rodriguez was married, but Molina, her husband, she was divorced from, a guy called Joe Martinez. And I don't know whether that was a recent divorce or it happened a few years prior, but they were, according to the newspapers, involved for at least 10 years. So I'm assuming that she played around behind his back at some point. Now, he wasn't charged. He went and got interviewed by police and was released. So the question is, was he the one stalking the victims, harassing them in the months prior? Because neither of the victims recognized the car, from what I can gather, the color, the make, or anything. So I would imagine, and the person was parked outside one of their houses. So one would have thought if it was him stalking the couple, irritated by what was going on, they would have at least recognized him or his vehicle.
Yeah, and I think even as I recall, Molina's children saw this person too and didn't recognize them out in the front yard watching. So between that circle of people, you think they would have known Molina's ex, that it wasn't him. They would have been able to verify that, and police definitely would have checked that out. And I assume that he must have had an airtight alibi, or he would have been the prime suspect, I would think. But again, this wasn't, as you mentioned, this was a 10-year relationship they had, so it wasn't some kind of fling that was just fresh and started. This was an ongoing relationship, and whether one was married, technically it was still an affair, but it was a serious long-term relationship. So, why wasn't this stuff going on for years if someone had a problem with it? Why would this suddenly be an issue in the months leading up to it? So I find that fascinating.
Well, I was thinking if their killer was Joe Martinez, why, especially if he was a never-before killer, wouldn't he just opt to murder the couple at the same time on Vallecillos Road? Why take the risk and perform an abduction?
And I'm no expert, but I believe that in this kind of situation, that I think I could see if it's someone that knew her, let's assume for a second it wasn't just a random person that came along, that it is connected to the earlier activity. I could see someone, she's the target, and they just want to get him out of the way real quick, and then they want to go with her. They want to, I could see them having a conversation, you shouldn't have been with him, you should have been with me, something along those lines, and trying to explain to her why he did what he did. I could see that happening again if this is connected to the earlier stalking activity. And his intention was to spend time with her and try and explain what he did and why he did it, that kind of thing. I personally don't think that Fermin Rodriguez was the main target. I think it was her, this person. Again, if it wasn't random, I think she was the main target, and they were taking her away for whatever reason, or again, taking her away because maybe of a, he wanted to sexually assault her or something, but she fought back. We just don't know.
I looked at Google Maps, and the area of Sunol Park is obviously extremely remote. There's no houses anywhere. So it surprises me that she was shot in the back. Surely he could have just ran after her. Nobody probably would have heard her scream. How would the killer lose control so easily?
Well, it could have been inexperience, just nervousness. Maybe it's their first time doing that, and they have a plan, but it doesn't go quite the way they want. It could be any number of different reasons, and that could explain why that happened. But you're right, it's a very rural area. There's not a lot of stuff out there. It's not like a place that's all kinds of homes all over the place where people are going to run out of their front door and see what's going on out there. Which it brings up another point. It seems like, what are the chances of someone just randomly running into a killer out in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of this random place? So there's a few possibilities in my mind. Either one, they were followed, someone sort of trailed them to that area, or two, maybe they arranged to meet someone out there. Could be another scenario. Or the third option is there was someone just sort of stalking that area looking for victims. I think that's, a possibility. I don't think it's as likely as the first two scenarios, but there are a few different scenarios here as to how they crossed paths with the killer that night.
I was looking at the two murder sites, and Vallecillos Road is a state route, whereas Sunol Park is very quiet and secluded, which I would have thought would have been the better option to choose to have a sort of love tryst or a secret meeting with somebody, because it's obviously more scenic, whereas Vallecillos Road is just a plain state route with just little pull-offs like Lake Herman Road.
Yeah, and it may have been just a quick a place of a spur of the moment thing. Rather than drive out to this nice scenic looking place here where it's romantic. Let's just go here real quick and we can do our thing and get on about our business. It could be something as simple as that.
Now, the fact that this double murder was 18 months before the Lake Herman Road murders, do you think the time period is too long without any intervening murders of note to argue for a budding Zodiac killer?
I think an expert could probably answer that more. Could have been someone that did it and they were excited by it and they were thinking about doing it again. And, maybe they said to themselves, like, I can't do that again. And it's not normal. I don't know. That's something an expert could explain better. And maybe just every time they thought about it, they pushed the urge down and fought it back. But eventually, again, if it was Zodiac that committed these crimes, eventually maybe the urge overcame him and he decided to do it again, and he did it at Lake Herman Road.
Now, this next part is important because you did some work on this. Now, the park naturalist at Sunol Park, Richard Angel, heard 2 shots from his location in the park. So it's extremely likely he heard the 2 shots fired at Miss Molina. The newspaper reports that I read stated she was shot in the back and left wrist. In this murder and the murder of Mr. Rodriguez, we have 4 shell casings that one would presume were collected at the crime scenes unless the killer had the foresight to remove them. You managed to secure some images of the bullets from the Molina Rodriguez murders, but were you also able to ascertain if the ex-detective you contacted could give you a heads up on the type of weapon they thought was used? And why wouldn't they compare the casings between the Lake Herman Road murders and the Alameda murders, such as firing pin impressions, breech marks and ejector marks on the casings themselves?
Well, I guess due to the investigation, they couldn't tell me all of the details. They wanted to keep some things quiet, but apparently, and this is my understanding, and it's been a while since I looked at those photos, the Alameda County cold case team reached out to Solano County and asked them for some of their evidence, to which Solano County sent them evidence in the form of some of the bullets, as far as I remember, from the Lake Herman Road crime. And the Alameda County people tried to do some ballistics to compare the bullets, but the Solano County evidence, the bullet they sent, was too badly damaged to be able to do any cross ballistics examinations to their crime scene. As far as casings, I don't remember the casings aspect of it. I don't remember if there were any casings exchanged or what the story was with that. I just know with the bullet, it was too damaged to get a match of any sort. But the weapons were a .22 caliber. I don't know that in the Sunol case, if they could determine what kind of .22. I just remember that it was a .22.
Because we do have 9 casings from Lake Herman Road, and we should have 4 in this case. So they can actually compare casings to see if they were fired from the same weapon, can't they?
Yeah, and you'll have to also forgive me because I think, and I'm going back, this has been so long now since I dug into this and had interactions with the police regarding this, but there was some stuff that I think may have even been lost or damaged in the case in Alameda. So I think they may have not had all they wanted as far as evidence from the crime scene. So perhaps some of the things they could have compared to the Lake Herman Road crimes weren't available.
Now, this is probably a difficult question to answer, but looking at the entirety of this case, I mean, all we've really got is what we can pick up from the newspapers and what you've found out. But what are your thoughts on whether the killer in this case was local to the area, in particularly Pleasanton, where we know a letter was mailed from, Livermore, or Fremont, which are all within 5 miles of each crime scene? The answer would probably ultimately lie in whether he was on foot or in a vehicle that night. So what do you reckon?
Well, I think it comes down to, if the earlier events, the calls, the stalking, the car parked out in the front, if that was connected to the murders, then it would seem that this person had some connection, knew the area, because they would have had to have been stalking the couple, and likely to have their phone number would have had to call them and know them in some way. So it does seem some kind of connection to them or to the area. So I think they would have known that. As far as the killer initially attacking them being on foot at the time he did it, I don't think that would be likely. I think he would have been driving around at the very least, and, in doing so would probably have some idea of that area.
Because if he was on foot and he drove him back to Vallecito Road, you'd think he wouldn't want to drive right back to where he lived, but closer to where he lived, within a reasonable walking distance to get back home. If he was on foot, that would give us a much better chance of not identifying the killer, but locating the area he lived in.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. But, and again, I think at this point it's, I even talked to the family of the victims, and they sort of, I don't want to say they forgotten the victims, but they sort of wanted to put it behind them. So they never really looked into it anymore or kept pressing for any more details. So it sort of really didn't go anyplace. And as far as what we're able to tell as far as details or what the family has to say.
Now, you've likened this to the Lake Herman Road murder of Zodiac to some extent. This is something I found out recently. It's not groundbreaking stuff, but close to the Lake Herman Road site, we have a water treatment plant pumping station mentioned by Russ Butterback in the Zodiac documentary. The murder site in Alameda County was just 500 meters from the Sunol Valley water treatment plant. The murder site is also between two reservoirs, which could also feature, say, at Lake Berryessa, the sort of connection there. I know this is slim pickings, but the familiarity with areas could come through a profession.
Yeah, I mean, for sure it could have someone that has to do with, dam building, dam management, water treatment, some kind of water examination, checking the quality of the water. It could be any number of different things that might, connect the water thing.
Right, we'll move on now, Mike. In the Anthony Vincent Bruno murder, the most crucial aspect regarding the letter found in the payphone is how long had elapsed from the murder to the letter being placed there. These would have been crucial details to know. At least we would know the murder and letter had a chance of being connected or not. What do you reckon about that?
Yeah, I think obviously that the time is crucial. I think the shorter the time span, the more likely there would have been a chance to come up with something solid connecting them. But not having that time, that exact time frame is a little bit of an issue that is a little bit troublesome in the case.
Do we know when it was first reported in the news, not just in the newspapers, on the radio maybe, or the TV?
I don't think I was ever able to find that. That was something I was looking at, trying to go back and figure out when that was, and I don't know that I ever found that.
What's your overall take on this? Do you think there's any chance this was a Zodiac killer, or it's just clutching at straws again?
So part of the evidence was the cassette tapes that were supposedly found. And obviously,
how reliable is that? How reliable is that information?
Well, it's indicated as happening. If it's legit, then it would be interesting to at least hear what's on those tapes. Now, we don't know that Zodiac ever left any tapes or anything like that, so that would be a little bit different. The Lover's Lane attack would be something Zodiac was known for, but then again, Zodiac and other killers find easy victims on Lover's Lanes in the dark. So it could just be a case of that kind of area being popular among these kinds of killers, and it has nothing to do with Zodiac. But, again, the fact there's a letter and tapes it's an interaction with police that most killers don't want to do. It's most killers, they want to get away, clean break, no clues, no evidence, nothing to work with for police. But Zodiac was someone that took chances. He reached out, he left little clues, he taunted them. And that's what it seems someone did in this case, as far as the cassette and the letter there. but we don't know what's in it. I was hoping against hope that I'd be able to get a copy of that and there'd be some kind of audio to listen to, but I don't even know if they have that any longer. If they ever did any digital recordings of it or anything like that, it would be interesting to know what was on there and what the person had to say.
Do you think it's foolhardy that these people lose these sorts of evidence or destroy them because of their opinion it's not the Zodiac killer or whoever? Because if it's connected, if it's not the Zodiac killer, but it's the murderer of Vincent Bruno, then it's imperative that they keep stuff like this and keep the case open.
Oh, no doubt. If they felt whether or not it's Zodiac it doesn't matter, because in the case it's relevant to the case, so they should have kept it in evidence. And sometimes we know they get rid of stuff or they discard it, they think it's a hoax, they think it's nothing to do with the case. We've seen that with Zodiac letters, with some of the December 1969 Fairfield letters, that kind of stuff, for example, where they just sort of say, oh, this is a hoax, or let's just get rid of it. In a murder case, anything that's connected as far as evidence to the actual murder, I don't think they would get rid of. I think as a matter of fact, they would keep that stuff in a box or wherever they keep it in a evidence room someplace. Now, what happens often is, you'd be surprised, it happens more often than we know. Labs lose stuff. The evidence room loses stuff. Sometimes there's a fire or a flood and evidence gets destroyed. So, and the FBI, for example, if you reach out to them and say, hey, I saw this in your FBI file, here's the file number, here's the letter, sometimes they just can't find the stuff. Even though you're giving them the exact information that you're reading off their file, they can't find it and they can't provide it to you. So stuff, unfortunately, does get lost, or it even gets damaged or whatever. I don't think in this case they would have thrown that stuff out just to say it's not connected, let's get rid of it. So I think it was there someplace, and probably was just lost.
I don't think either of us believe that this murder had anything to do with the Zodiac killer, but we have to remember that in 1978, somebody claiming to be the Zodiac killer typed, I have my real name on a small metallic tape. I can't help wondering if that cassette tape in the phone booth was a message from Zodiac, signed on the A side. Whatever the case, what did the author mean by real name? Because there is no way somebody is going to willingly give their real name on a cassette tape or otherwise.
Yeah, I don't know. I could only be guessing what he means by real name. Unless
what's your interpretation of metallic tape?
Well, metallic tape, and again, I think more experts that have worked on this would probably know this more than me. I think it's definitely some kind of specific tape that is used for certain types of recordings or certain types of projects. So, the use of metallic tape in particular is very precise. It's really narrowing down. So that could be a clue to who this person was that wrote that, and that's something that hopefully they did look at to see what he meant by metallic tape, and if that was an insight to that person's background or their job or whatever.
I don't think many people are convinced of that 1978 letter, are they?
It seems like they're not. And I think I've said this before, and I'll say it again. That seems to be one of the letters that DNA was recovered from. And whether that DNA is or isn't the Zodiac's, I think they should do a forensic genealogy and find that person, and then do an investigation on them, question them, and then rule them out as being Zodiac. Then you can say with certainty it's a hoaxer. But I think they should be looking for all types of DNA and identifying everyone that ever wrote letter in the Zodiac case, whether it was the real Zodiac or not, and just, marking them off the list and saying, okay, this one's a hoax for sure. This one's a hoax for sure. And maybe they get to the right person.
The murders of Molina and Rodriguez and the murder of Anthony Vincent Bruno are separated by approximately 28 miles, that is by crow. Have you ever considered that these two crimes may be connected in some way, or you've pretty much dismissed them having any connection to one another?
You mean the Bruno case and the
Molina Rodriguez cases? They're separated by 9 years, but could they be connected because of the proximity, or is it because we have so many murders in California that it's really pretty irrelevant?
Well, again, you sort of have a lover's lane aspect to it. So anytime you have a lover's lane aspect to it, you can sort of put them in their own category, and that eliminates a lot of the other cases. You've got someone out there stalking, looking for a victim, whatever, attacking them in a isolated area. That sort of goes in its own little category. But again, that's a popular way to seek victims, I think, for a lot of people. A lot of killers are looking for easy prey that aren't paying attention, that there's no witnesses around. So that's the perfect spot to do that in. So just because it was a lover's lane type area doesn't mean that it's connected. But since it's a reasonably close proximity, I don't think you can rule it out.
Yeah, 28 miles in America is close proximity, not so much over here.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Zodiac Speaking. Please make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening now, so you don't miss a single episode. New episodes of Zodiac Speaking will air every other Saturday. If you want to follow or interact with us on social media, we'd love to hear from you. You can find Zodiac Speaking on Twitter with the handle @PodcastZodiac, or you can search Facebook for Zodiac Speaking Podcast.
And don't forget, you can get plenty of Zodiac details 24/7 by visiting my site at zodiacciphers.com or by going to Mike's site at zodiackiller.net.
If you'd like to help more people find Zodiac Speaking, please take a moment to rate the show and leave a review of it on your favorite podcast player or app. As we wrap up this episode, Rich and I would like to play a preview of a true crime podcast we think you'll like. It's called Active Shooter. Be sure to give it a listen. On behalf of Rich, this is Mike Morford, and I'd like to say thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Zodiac Speaking.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter events. We will delve into the lives interrupted by domestic terrorists. We will investigate the background of the shooter and together discuss ways in which they can be stopped or even prevented in the future. We will also discuss the failures of our mental health system.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 1692 means we got shots fired. 4:15 a.m. Route 291. Sounded like an automatic firearm.
But appears to be shots fired.
We will look at the media responses and discover together how they may have inadvertently inspired and contributed to the rise of the mass shootings.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
active shooter, mass casualty incidents.
This is not a political podcast, nor a podcast about gun control. This is a podcast that studies the psychology behind active shooters, and how and why they make the decisions they have made to take the lives of innocent people.
I love you. I love you. It's going to be fine. Can you hide somewhere? Can you play dead?
Welcome to Active Shooter. Thank you for listening.